Hey there, so I'm going to make a video every week to try to help you prepare to walk through the literature circle. I am so pleased with this group. I just can't say enough good things about you. I'm so excited to have you on the team, to have you working with us, and I'm excited for what's going to happen on Tuesday. So let's dive in. Okay, so this is page 1 and it has your ground rule. So when the scholars, by the way, we're going to call the participating students, the 9th graders, scholars. There are actually maybe a few 10th graders woven in, don't need to make a big deal about that. But we'll call them the scholars, so that kind of gives the connotation of empowerment, right? You are intelligent and able to think about the text and interact and so forth. Okay, so this is the ground rule for Lit Circle. Everyone is valued in the circle. Very simple, empowering. I've given you some examples here to call people back. You don't need to really go into a lot of detail on this on the front end, I don't think. It's just to say, hey, you're welcome here, we value you, we're glad you're here, you're important to us, and that's because of that we're going to treat each other in a way that values each other. Make sure you, of course, introduce yourselves, the leaders, right from the get-go. Welcome them. There's your ground rule. These are just examples. So you want to highlight positive examples. Highlighting positive is one of the best ways to reinforce the kinds of behaviors you're looking for. So when you see someone listening, caring, thinking deeply about what someone else says, reward it, mention it, okay? But you may need to call people back to this. So these are ways to kind of gently call scholars back to this ground rule. And I think pretty much that's going to take care of any basic issues related to behavior. Of course, we never know who's going to walk in, and we'll deal with other things. I'll be available, or others will be available if you need to use this as a resource or discuss particular issues that come up. I think this is pretty good. Okay, so I do want you to look at the safe place because there may be some things that occur in our discussion that might bring up some difficult topics for scholars. We're not assuming that's the case, but it might be, so we want to be prepared if it is. Okay? But you don't need to share all this stuff with them. You might want to talk about the fact of what's in the book at some point during this first Lit Circle and what to do if something kind of does bring up some memories or something troubling to you. That might be good to discuss. Okay. Now, then week 1, so keep going into this part of the Leader's Guide. There's going to be a quick write. Every week there's a quick write. It can be before, it can be after. Advantage of before is we're going to do introduction, so it'll get the scholars thinking and get something solid on their paper that'll maybe help them share something. So whenever there's a quick write, that quick write is in the scholars binder, so they'll turn there and they'll write. Let them write for a few minutes. If they're all avidly writing, they could go 8-9 minutes, and then I'd say, boy, at that point, just say, let's curtail this. Okay, so you can say, you can finish later if you'd like to, but let's take maybe 1 more minute, and then let's move into introductions or something. If half of them are done and half of them are still writing, you might want to do that earlier. The quick write doesn't need to be long. They're not getting a grade for this, right? So it's just a chance to talk about themselves here. And then you'll use this to ask their names, because we may not have the correct pronunciation, so we want to make sure we get their names correct and allow them to share something important. And it could be something very much at like the family level, or it could be something, world peace, whatever. It's their turn to share. You can share as well. And then we'll look around the book a little bit. What genre is it? It's nonfiction, obviously. There's going to be stories, so it's narrative. Let's look at the parts of the book, and especially you can ask questions. So, hey, let's look at the table of contents, right? And there's some interesting chapter titles. What do you predict based on these, etc.? Then some reading. I suggest you read instead of, like, one of the leaders read instead of having the scholars read. If a scholar's really dying to, maybe you can split up and let them read a paragraph. Someone else might want to read a paragraph. But we don't want to kill everybody on the first time they have the book in their hand with somebody reading very monotonously, okay? So you don't need to say that, but if you read, it'll solve that problem. Have them follow, though. So the book should be open the whole time from this point through the rest of the discussion. Have their books open. and they're following, and then after reading, it starts at the beginning of the prologue. There's a break on 7. We're not going to read all the way through the prologue. What was important to Stevenson? So you see the connection now, right? So they thought about what was important to them, what's important to Stevenson. Here's some vocabulary. So every time I have vocabulary, I have it labeled. And I say here, do not provide verbatim. I mean this for every time you have vocabulary, but I quit writing it because I figured you get the point. I would like to work on the skills of thinking about what this word means. So morphology is involved, right? So we have dis in both cases, and I've given you what dis can mean, and it may be a little bit differently used in these. Even thinking positive or negative is a great thing. I mean, I think most of the scholars probably would be able to say, well, it's negative. And if they think of other words with dis, they might get, well, it kind of reverses something. Okay. But I also gave you the place, so make sure you go back and look at the sentence in which the word occurs. Really important, because there may be clues right around there. When I have it in italics, it's really for your benefit, but it can certainly be used in the conversation. So you might want to ask, what was Bryan Stevenson disenchanted with, and what did he think was disconnected? Right, so his education was not completely connected in his mind with real life and interests, but of course he does that, right? So he studies law, but he becomes an attorney who's actually defending people who are voiceless. So here's some more questions. So the next thing to do is just follow through these questions, try to value scholars' opinions and thoughts about things. It's really easy for us to say, well, and make it clear like we don't really think that's the right answer. Another way you can approach that is say, does anyone else, thank you for sharing that. Does everyone agree? Does anyone else have a thought? Something like that. And you can say that when you think they're right too, okay? But several questions that you can focus on with the scholars just based on those couple pages of reading. So this is an interesting quote, so you can analyze a little bit. What does it mean? So capital punishment means them without the capital get the punishment, right? So capital has two meanings here, right? One is it's the capital, it's like the chief punishment, it's the death penalty, but also capital can refer to money. So those people who don't have money wind up being the people who are actually killed by the state. So you can kind of unpack that a little bit. When you get done with the discussion, you do need to kind of watch your time as you're going and try to watch it in a way that doesn't seem like when the scholar's talking, you're like, oh, look at my watch now. But do be mindful of the time so you can keep a pace. And then we want to make a challenge. Okay, so I have a challenge page that will be in the Scholar Binder, and we're challenging them to read the book for the next week. I have the chapters listed here that they'll be going through, finish the introduction, and go through chapters 1 and 2. Okay, that's the goal for the next week. And then a little planning. How are you going to do it? Do you have a good space to read? What about note-taking? Can you write in your book? Yes, you can write in your book. That's a great idea. Underline, highlight, page mark things. We're giving them a bookmark so they can use that to keep tabs on where they are. But then, they can also use little sticky notes or things, or separate notes with page numbers, so that as they come in with interesting things to talk about, they can refer back to the things that stood out to them. What kinds of things would be interesting? Words you weren't familiar with, new concepts, something that you thought he said really well, something you're not unsure what he means, you have a question about, etc. So challenge them to do that, and they'll write in for their agreement that they plan. This is how they plan to do it. And if you have any extra time left over after doing these things, just sit and hang out, get to know a little bit more about them. Make sure they're comfortable, understand kind of how things are going to flow. And that is week 1, and I got it in less than 10 minutes. We'll see you on Tuesday, those who are coming for the first session. Thank you.